She was 8 years old, standing at her parents' graves, asking a question that had no good answer: why did they leave me? The social worker had no words of comfort. The distant relatives offered only excuses. But a millionaire standing nearby, a complete stranger, stepped forward with a letter sealed for 3 years, carrying a secret that would rewrite everything this little girl thought she knew about love, sacrifice, and family. The rain fell steadily on Oakwood Cemetery in Portland, Oregon, as if the sky itself was grieving. 8-year-old Maya Thompson stood between two fresh graves, her small hand clutched in a social worker's. The funeral was small. Her parents had lived quiet lives, had few friends, and left behind almost nothing except each other and their daughter. Sarah and Michael Thompson had died in a house fire 3 days earlier. Faulty wiring in their modest rental home had sparked a blaze that spread too quickly. They had gotten Maya out first, pushing her through a bedroom window into a neighbor's waiting arms, then ran back inside for something no one could identify. They never came out. Investigators called it a tragic accident. Maya called it the day her world ended. Placed in emergency foster care while authorities searched for relatives, she watched hope shrink with every phone call. Her maternal grandparents were dead. Her father's mother had advanced dementia. An aunt in California claimed financial hardship. An uncle in Florida said his apartment was too small. Everyone had a reason not to take in an 8-year-old orphan. At the graveside, Maya finally spoke the question that had been twisting inside her since the fire. Why did they leave me? Her voice, small but steady, cut through the rain and the uncomfortable silence. The social worker knelt beside her, trying to explain tragedy in terms a child could hold, but Maya interrupted her. The neighbor said they pushed me out and then went back. Why didn't they stay with me? No one had an answer, except the stranger watching from a distance. Robert Chen, a 52-year-old pharmaceutical millionaire, stood apart from the mourners, wearing an expensive coat that made him look completely out of place. He hadn't known the Thompsons personally, but he'd come because of a promise he'd made 3 years earlier, a promise he hoped would never be needed. He approached slowly and introduced himself to the social worker. Then, with quiet reverence, he presented a weathered envelope with Maya's name on it, written in her mother's looping handwriting. Her parents had left it with him years before, to be delivered only if they died. Janet, the social worker, was cautious, but Maya stared at the envelope as if it might answer every question she couldn't stop asking. Robert explained the truth. He had met Sarah during a clinical trial for a rare, fatal genetic disorder. She had been diagnosed in her early 20s and given less than a decade to live. Despite that, she fell in love with Michael, who, impossibly, had the same terminal condition. They were told not to have children. Pregnancy would accelerate Sarah's decline. But they wanted whatever time they could have as a family, even if it shortened their lives. The experimental treatments extended their time, barely, but they spent those borrowed years loving Maya and preparing for the day they feared most. They saved every dollar, lived simply, and built a trust fund for their daughter. When they ran back into the burning house, they hadn't been retrieving valuables. They were trying to save the documents proving the trust existed. Later, at a cafe, Maya opened the letter. In pages written years earlier, Sarah explained everything: their diagnoses, the choices they made, the sacrifices they lived with daily. She wrote about saving every penny for Maya's future, about choosing parenthood even though it meant less time alive, about loving Maya enough to endure pain and exhaustion without burdening her with the truth. "We didn't leave you," the letter read. "We just couldn't stay as long as we wanted." The letter included memories, recipes, explanations for moments Maya had misunderstood, times her parents had seemed tired or sad. They hadn't been distant because she was a burden. They were dying, fighting for one more day to be her mom and dad. And when Maya tearfully asked Robert how much they had saved, the answer stunned her: around $300,000, enough for college, a first car, and a future they would never live to see. Over the next weeks, the full scope of Sarah and Michael's sacrifice came into view. They had worked multiple jobs while secretly battling a terminal illness. They had turned down treatments that would have extended their lives but reduced the money they could save for Maya. They had made detailed plans, letters for birthdays, videos for future milestones, instructions for who should care for Maya. And that guardian wasn't a relative, it was Robert Chen. Judges, skeptical of a billionaire seeking custody, questioned his motives. But Robert told the truth. Sarah and Michael had taught him what love looked like. He wanted to honor the trust they'd placed in him. He wasn't trying to replace them, he was trying to continue what they started. And so, Maya moved in with him. The transition was far from easy. Grief showed itself in anger, nightmares, food hoarding, and endless questions that had no comforting answers. Robert restructured his life, worked from home, hired therapists, and learned parenting hour by hour. 4 months later, Maya experienced a breakthrough while looking at a photo album her mother had prepared. In one picture, she was a muddy toddler laughing, while her exhausted parents smiled behind her. The caption explained they had been tired from treatment and long shifts, but her joy had made it worth everything. For the first time, Maya understood the depth of their love. That night, she asked if she could call Robert Uncle Robert. It wasn't Dad, that title would always belong to Michael, but it was connection, trust, and healing. 2 years later, on a warm spring day, Maya stood at her parents' graves again. She was thriving now, 10 years old, involved in school and theater, learning to cook her mother's recipes. Robert stood beside her as her adoptive parent, a role he embraced wholeheartedly. When he gently asked if she still wondered why her parents left, Maya shook her head. They hadn't left her, they had stayed as long as humanly possible. She placed her flowers and whispered, they thought of everything. And they had. The trust fund that began with their sacrifices had grown with Robert's guidance. It would pay for her education, her stability, her adulthood. But what mattered most was not the money, it was the knowledge that she had been loved so deeply that even death could not erase the proof. Maya's story challenges everything we think we know about parenting, sacrifice, and legacy. Her parents had only 8 years with her but used them to give her a lifetime of security. Their letter transformed the question, why did they leave me, into a truth she could carry forever. They didn't leave me, they just couldn't stay. And Robert's presence proved that family is built by choice, love, and promise, not just blood. Through him, Maya learned that being left by death is not the same as being abandoned. So if this story moved you, think about the people in your life who need to know they're loved, planned for, or remembered. Think about children who need advocates like Robert, people willing to step forward simply because it is the right thing to do. Like this story if Maya's journey changed how you think about love and legacy. Subscribe for more stories of extraordinary love hidden in ordinary lives. And share in the comments, has anyone ever loved you more deeply than you realized? Because every child deserves to know they were wanted, fought for, and loved enough that even death couldn't silence that truth.